40 years ago this week, 591 prisoners of war began to be released from Vietnam in Operation Homecoming.
But many more Americans were left behind, and a local journalist and CBS News correspondent, as well as a Vietnam veteran, have written about that in a new ebook. Molly Cooney met up with Rick Fredericksen inside the Gold Star Museum at Camp Dodge to learn more in the artist studio.
Some 2,500 Americans were left behind in the Vietnam War, and this new book, After the Hanoi Hilton, tells about what happens in the search for the MIAs and POWs. And the author is a very familiar face and voice to many of us here in Iowa. Rick Fredericksen, a former co-worker with me at KCCI and now with Iowa Public Radio. This is a very close, near and dear to you story, Rick. Tell us a little bit about your background and how this book came to be.
Well, before we worked together at KCCI TV, I was a Marine and a Vietnam veteran in 1969 and 1979, but my job was as a journalist. I was on the air, the war news editor, so I'd go on TV and read stories about major battles and losses and casualties, and many of those Americans became missing in action, some of them prisoners of war. So I covered this story from the very first incidents of losses, and then many years after the war ended, I was back in that region working for CBS News for 10 years, and the biggest story that I covered for CBS was the search for these 2,500 Americans who never came home. It was after Operation Homecoming, so we had hundreds that did come home, but what about the 2,500 that remain? Were some of those still alive? If not, where are their remains? How can we determine a pathway to go search for them? And it was a long, complicated diplomatic back and forth between these two former enemies over a period of years, and I got to cover it. I wrote 3,000 stories during my 10 years for CBS, and I've got all the scripts. Most of them pertain to the POW-MIA issue, and I had this great record that I thought should be preserved in a book format because nobody else was there for that long, perhaps covering it the way I did. So the record stands, and the search, unfortunately or fortunately, continues today. That number is now down to about 1,600 missing in action from the Vietnam War.
It's a fascinating read. It's something I think everyone needs to read and reread because it is such a personal history. There were so many hoaxes. There were so many hopes. Very familiar names, Senator Grassley, John Kerry, Kenneth Quinn, that all participated in these searches for the MIAs and POWs.
And let's not forget the Iowans who are still missing in action. I think that the list is 25 MIAs still today that were lost either in North or South Vietnam or Cambodia or Laos. So yeah, we still have some work to do. There were lots of hoaxes, photo hoaxes, live sighting reports, and they became the subjects of special investigations. The Senate, Senator Kerry, who's now our Secretary of State, was on scene with John McCain. They actually brought their Senate investigation to Vietnam, and I covered some of their live hearings in Hanoi as part of this process to go back and forth with Vietnam. And it's really amazing how important these 1,600 MIAs are today. They continue to be, I hate to use the word bargaining chip, but in a sense, we have accomplished so much in renewing our relations with Vietnam because of these Americans who never returned. We accomplished getting Vietnam out of Cambodia. The Vietnamese have also utilized the issue in their favor to reestablish normal relations, to get the trade embargo lifted. And now Vietnam is one of the tiger economies in Southeast Asia, and the U.S.-Vietnamese military even has exchanges underway today. So our relations have come a long way, thanks in part to the POW and MIA issue.
What does this book mean to you?
Well, as a Vietnam veteran myself, we all knew going into uniform that we would be given a flag for our funeral and that we would be taken care of while we were in the military. Hopefully, we would be brought back alive. If not, the military would make every effort possible to bring back some remnants, some fragments of our remains so that our families could put us to rest. I think the government has done a terrific job. I don't think there are any live POWs left. It would be great if we could get some out, but as the years tick by, I do think we're talking about missing in action, but there's a lot of plane crash sites, there's a lot of grave sites. Now they're focusing on underwater recoveries. Many planes were lost at sea. As we recover more remains, that brings closure to the families that have been waiting now for 38 years since the war ended.
Unbelievable. Rick, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your accounts firsthand. It's a wonderful read, and we appreciate it. Let's bring them all home.
Thanks for keeping the issue alive for us.
Absolutely. For KCCI, I'm Molly Cooney in the Artist Studio.
Rick's book, After the Hanoi Hilton and Accounting, can be found only in ebook format. It's available through all major ebook sites, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Today's 52 Works in 50